OpenAI just released their new AgentKit, and they've got some pretty good demos out there about using the Agent Builder Canvas. But is it really as simple as they make it out to be? Yes. And also no, a little bit. But I think together we can figure this out. So I, like many of you probably, watched the quick little 5-minute demonstration from OpenAI on how to build an agent. It was a really good demo, but clearly this is somebody who knew what they were doing, because in 5 minutes they went from nothing to a fully functional agent that could either get you flight information or a travel itinerary. I was curious if it was really as easy as they were making it out to be, and there were a couple of steps that she kind of glossed over that I knew I would probably have a few stumbles. And the process was very enlightening and quite interesting. Hopefully I can share some of the mistakes or traps that I fell into, and you can avoid them when you go in to build your very own agent, which I am now quite confident you also can do. So OpenAI released this excellent Intro to Agent Builder video. It's a simple 5-minute start to finish Agent Builder Canvas demonstration. They take us from a starter Canvas workflow, add a classifier agent, list some values, add a simple logic node, and then that's where things got just a little bit confusing for me, where she freeform typed the input variables. This piece I didn't quite understand, but I will go into that. And then added 2 more agents depending on the incoming message. By the end of it, she had a working agent ready for publication. It was clear that she had done some of the work beforehand, and obviously she really knew what she was doing. But I wanted to take this demonstration and see if I could map it into my own agent and see if it was even possible for me to create anything that worked. So back when I was first testing Codex, I built this little website that just takes a random sampling of publicly available webcams around national parks. You just click the roll the dice button and get a national park webcam feed. Yellowstone. Oh, it's got snow already. More Yellowstone, more Yellowstone. You never know what you're going to get. Mount Rainier National Park, parking lot. That's gorgeous. So this turned out to be unexpectedly fun. I was never sure what I was going to get next. Sometimes it was a parking lot, sometimes it was a park entrance, sometimes it was a gorgeous stream, sometimes I got the ocean. I even ran into those bear catching salmon cams every once in a while. There were a few national parks I had never heard of before, and I kind of wanted more information. So obviously these are national park webcams. I could go to the national park website, but I thought this would be a good opportunity to build an agent. I was hoping to ask it 3 different things. One was more about the location, maybe city, state, maybe even a map. Second thing was maybe just a fun fact about the park or the webcam. I'm not really sure which. And then finally, sort of a general purpose, almost really a default option on the agent. All right, so Agent Builder. Obviously, this does require that you have an OpenAI account, and in order to make any of the agent nodes work, you do need an API key. If you go to platform.openai.com, you can get to both the Agent Builder and the API keys. I'm not going to go into the API key system, just click on that and follow the process to get an API key if you need to. But once you have that, you can go into the Agent Builder system. So that's where I am. They do have a bunch of templates that you can go take a look at. You can sort of see what they've done and the fields that they've got. It's kind of helpful just to see what somebody else has done and what some of these nodes are used for. But I'm going to go ahead and just create a new agent. So all new agents start with this simple template. There's a start and a My Agent node. I am not sure yet how this fits into my actual website, so I'm going to keep this as is and assume that this is how the agents always start off. So since this is the default agent, theoretically, this should work as is. As you're building the agent, it's really helpful to test it out as you're going, and you can do that up here by hitting preview. So this just shows you the agent workflow as is. So you can say hello, and it shows you the process of going from start to the My Agent. It does some thinking, And basically it answers as a default agent. Then you close that up and then you can make your changes. All right, so my idea was to kind of follow along with the demo video. She had a starting point and then it went to an agent that decided what kind of query it was. That went to a logic node, an if-else kind of node, and then that split it out to a couple of other agents depending on the type of query it was. So I'm going to follow that pattern and make the first agent kind of a decider agent. So I'm just going to call it that. And in the instructions, I'm going to say, you are a helpful assistant. Messages come into you and you have to decide if they're a general query, location information, or fun fact. All right, so some of the other options you have are to include the chat history, which I definitely want to keep in there. You can choose the model. Obviously, this is an OpenAI product, so you only have options of GPT models. I'm going to leave it on GPT-5 for now. Reasoning effort is low by default. That's definitely fine for what I need. There is a section where we can add tools, which we will get to in a minute, but not yet. And then the output format. That's the output of this particular node that you're in. It can be text, JSON, or a widget. In the demonstration, she did have some widgets, and I am definitely interested in that, but I realized I don't know enough about them to build them. So I won't be going into that today. Hopefully that's something I can figure out in the future. So when you start, this start node is going to take whatever message the user types in, and it's going to take that and put it into a string called input as text. It's going to send that to the next agent, and that agent then has access to that string. So based on what you type, it's going to send something to the next agent. And here is where we're going to specify the format that that output is being sent to the next node. And we want that to be JSON, and we want to add schema for that. So we're going to add a property, and you can name this anything you want. I'm going to call it query type. I'm going to make it an enumeration, which means it can be only one of a certain set of values. And you enter the values down here. And I'm just going to say it can be a location. And then if you hit comma, it saves that as one of the types. It can be a fun fact, or it can be general info. So those are the three types of output. I'm going to update that, and that is now saved in my decider agent. All right, so the next step is to add a logic piece, and I want to connect the decider agent to that if-else statement. My screen is, I've got myself some limited real estate here, but that's okay. All right, so this is the part in the demonstration from OpenAI. I did get a little bit confused because she went in here and just started typing. She clearly knew what she was doing. I need to just kind of point and click, but luckily Agent Builder lets you do that. So you remember over in the decider object, we set some values for query type. So I want to say if the query type is equal to, and here's where we have to remember what we named them. If it's location, that's going to go to one agent. And then if I only had two options, I could just leave it alone, be done here and say it's location, or else it's the other thing. But because I had three, I do need to add another block in here. So if it's location, it's going to do one thing. Else, if the query type is fun fact, then it's going to go to another agent. And because I only have three types, I can just leave the else as the default, the general query option. All right, so that's the if else. And then I need to hook these guys up to agents. So I'm going to add an agent over here. All right, and I'm going to connect the location to the first agent. So that agent is going to be my location agent. Okay, so I'm going to tell it, you are a location agent. You'll return the name of the park as well as the city and state that park is located in. Also include a link to a map of that location. So now here's where I have become very experimental because I don't really know what I'm doing. Also, I have this problem of in the website knows the name of the park and I think the name of the park camera that it's looking at. But here in this agent canvas, I don't know that, and I don't know how that information is going to come in. But I do want to be able to test it here before I deploy it or add it to my website. So I'm in a little bit of a pickle. Luckily, you can set variables, you can set state inside of here. So there's a couple of ways to do that. In this start node, I can just set some state variables right there. So one of them that I want to enter is park name, and it gives you the option to make a default value. And in this case, I do want to give it a default value because I want to be able to test. So I'm going to just say this is Estes Park, and you can make it any type of object, but we want a string. So I'm going to leave that as string. Save that. Oh, and there will be, I think, access to a park camera. I'm going to leave that blank. This is more for my own mental bookkeeping. I think I will have access to that inside the website, and maybe I can do something interesting with that. So I'm just going to leave it there as a placeholder. All right, so now I've got some state variables, and those are accessible across the entire agent. The other way you can do that based on the documentation, you can add a node to set the state. So if I wanted, I could connect start to a set state variable, and I could add the variables in there and set their state, set their values. But until I figure out exactly what the best way to do this is, it felt easiest to me just to leave it in start. All right, so start is going to call the decider. The decider is going to figure out what type of message the user is sending in. It's going to send it to the if-else logic node, and then the logic node is going to decide which agent to send it to. So we were back on the location agent. So here you see the need for that first state variable. And down here in the instructions, you can add context. Because I set it as a location agent and I said you need to return the name of the park as well as the city and state the park is located in, I need to know the park name. So we are going to add the park name as a variable, as context. So I did have to play around with this a little bit to figure out how to use this. I'm not entirely sure I'm using it correctly, but I did figure out at least a way to be able to test the workflow. So I'm going to stick with that and claim that this is definitely probably not the best way and probably maybe not even the right way, but it's a way to test your agent workflow. So the way that I was able to use it was to just actually put it inside of the instructions. You will return the name of the park and just put that right here, because that will resolve to an actual string. So you are a location agent, you will return the name of the park, Estes Park, as well as the city and state that park is located in. Also include a link to a map of that location. So in order for the agent to get the city and state and a link to a map, I'm going to need to give it a tool, and I'm going to need to let it have access to the web. By default, they don't have web search. You definitely need to hook that up. So you can limit the websites it's searching. You can set all kinds of parameters in here. I'm going to leave it everything blank because, again, I'm just trying to test out to see if I can figure out what I'm doing. All right, and the output format, as far as I can tell, I think is fine as text. All right, so the next agent is going to be a fun fact. So we're going to call him the fun fact agent. I know, I'm super original in my naming. All right, so the fun fact agent. You are an agent that provides fun information about nature and parks. Browse the web if you need to and return one fun fact based on the park name or the park camera. I'm thinking theoretically we might get some cameras. I definitely ran across some that had like an eagle's nest. Maybe there's some interesting information to be gleaned from the actual camera, not just the park, because a lot of these parks have multiple cameras set up. I don't know. I'm just going to throw it in there and hope down the road this will reveal itself. And then otherwise, we need one more agent. Let's scooch him around. All right, so this is the general purpose agent. I'm going to say you're a general purpose agent. Answer the question to the best of your ability. If you don't know the answer, just say the ranger service is closed today. All right, so I think that's it, and we can test. To test this out, you will hit preview. Now, the first time I was in here, preview was grayed out, and I had to, I think I had verify my organization or something. Basically, there was some setup involved, maybe because I was in here for the first time, maybe because I hadn't logged out and logged back in since some of these tools were upgraded. I'm not really sure, but I did have to go through a verification process where I had to get my phone out and scan a QR code. Then I had to go scan in my driver's license front and back and take a series of photos of myself, front, left side, right side. And basically, it was just verifying that I was human. I don't remember having to go through that process before, but I did have to go through that before I had access to this. So if you hit that step 2, while I can't say that's normal or expected, I can at least say that happened to me. So I'm kind of hoping that that's normal and expected. All right, but once you do all that, you may have to refresh your browser a couple of times, but then you will get this preview button, and that's where you get to test your workflow. So I want to say, what's the location of the park? And remember, we've hard-coded the value to Estes Park, and you can see it thinking, you can see the decider reasoning, you can kind of see where it is in the step-by-step process, and this worked great. The location agent comes back with Estes Park, Colorado, and the link to the map, which actually works. I'm kind of stunned. That is awesome. Okay, so how about, can you tell me a fun fact about the park? All right, here's a fun fact about Estes Park. The town is home to the historic Stanley Hotel, which inspired Stephen King's The Shining after he stayed there in 1974, and you can still take a spooky night tour of the hotel today. All right, so let's follow up on that. Can you tell me more about the Stanley Hotel? It's going through the decider, going through if else, and it hit the general purpose agent. Stephen King connection, the history, built by the inventor of Stanley Steamer as a luxury mountain resort. There's a Stephen King connection. You can get tours. There's quite a bit of information. All right, so this is great, and it looks like everything is working fine. However, I will say in my testing, I had several times where it started up, it went through the decider, it went through the if else, went to an agent, and then just returned nothing. And I could not figure out why. So each of these responses is a log file. And if you click on those, you can go see the reasoning that was happening behind the scenes. Yeah, and so this is what I kept running into. Can you tell me about the Stanley Hotel? And the reasoning was empty. So we've lucked out in this case because this is a helpful assistant and it is still a ChatGPT 5 model. So it has quite a bit of information that it's been trained on. But what happened to me, I realized when I was building these agents, I had forgotten to give it web search. So I was asking it questions sometimes that it did not have an answer to. So if you run into that problem where it's just returning nothing, one of the things to look into is if it needs access to the web and you forgot to give it a web search tool, you might want to double check that. And in fact, I'm going to enable it for all of my agents. All right, so then I'm going to preview it again and I'm going to ask it again, where is this park located? And so you can always go into each one of these logs. You can see them flash by as they're happening, but after the fact, it kind of collapses and it just goes to the log file. So you can always click in here and go check out the log file. And sometimes that's kind of a helpful debugging tool because you can at least see what the system instructions are, what the user input was, and what type of reasoning occurred. And so if this is blank, that probably is an indication that your tool is empty or something else has gone amiss. It doesn't have some of the information it needs. All right, close that up. So the other thing that I found really helpful about this tool that I had not noticed before, inside of each node in the detailed information, there is, you can either delete it up here or there's this little book and you can learn more. If you click that, it brings up OpenAI's documentation for the nodes. And so each type of node, it's got a little bit of write-up about sort of best practices and what you would want to use it for and kind of what it can do. One of the pieces of advice in the Agent Builder documentation is to keep each agent well defined in scope. So while it might be tempting to say, I mean, this is a ChatGPT agent, this is GPT-5, I could just have one agent and I could just ask it anything, right? I could send in location or fun fact or a general query. Why am I breaking it out like this? Well, their recommendation is to keep each agent as single purpose as possible and to break out every type of processing unit into individual agents. So they even mention they have a homework helper example. They use one agent to rewrite the user's query just to make it a better prompt. They use another agent to classify the query as either Q&A or fact-finding, which is kind of what we did. We had an agent where we classified the query as location or fun fact or other. And then finally, another agent to field each type of question. So that's one of their best practices advice. So that's why I'm following that. That's why I have so many different agents. It sounds like it's probably going to be easier to maintain going forward. And I will say it's going to definitely be easier to debug because you've got things separated. You're following a single path per query. All right, so just one other quick note of a problem that I had. I'm going to pull the web search tool out of the location agent. I'm going to try to preview that again. What's the location of this park? And I'm going to see if it runs. And this is what I was talking about before, where it just sort of doesn't return anything. It doesn't return an error message. It just looks like it didn't work. So this is where it was helpful to go into the log and take a look. And I was seeing problems like this: resolving instructional conflict. It seems there's a conflict in the developer's instruction. One part indicates I should return the name of the park, like Estes Park, while the schema requires me to only output the query type in JSON format. So this is a great example. I kept seeing things like this, and I could not figure out what that meant, what I was doing wrong. And this was just an indication, actually, that it didn't have access to the tools that it needed. This was my indication that I needed a web search tool included in the agent. All right, so now that I have the agent, I think where I want it, I am going to hit publish. And I'm going to call this my ParkCam agent workflow. I'm going to publish it, and it should be available to me now. So now this is where you can either use ChatKit or the Agents SDK to implement it. This video is already long enough, so I am not going to go into that in this video. And in fact, I have not yet tried this, so I still don't know how this interacts with my already built website over there. So that's going to be my next task for myself, is to figure out how to take this and actually put it into my working website. But for today, I'm really happy with my results. I was able to get an agent workflow up and running following the demonstration that OpenAI gave us. I'm super impressed. I really was not sure if I'd be able to get something up and running because there were just a couple of steps that I was unsure of in that demo. And I was really happy with how easy it is to just go start pressing buttons and just playing and seeing what happens. And their templates are really, really helpful. There were a couple of nodes I just was not sure of setting the state and that context piece, where I needed to pass it along and how I used it. So I just went and looked at some of their templates, and that really helped me understand how they were using it and how each node interacted with each other. So I can't recommend enough going and looking at their examples and just going and playing. It's really set up to be a standalone workflow. You can build it and test it start to finish without ever leaving the workflow canvas. All right, that is it for today. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please consider a like and a subscribe. It definitely helps the channel and lets me know that I should keep doing this kind of content. I figure if I'm trying to figure it out, somebody else is too, and we may as well figure it out together. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.